She thought she could control the whole neighborhood, until she called the cops on the wrong man. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell because more HOA drama is coming your way. It was a sunny Saturday morning, the kind of morning where the sky looked like it had been painted bright blue just for me. The air was crisp, birds were chirping, and I felt that rare sense of peace you get when starting fresh in a new place. As I turned into the entrance of my new neighborhood, the rumble of my Rolls Royce engine echoed like a deep heartbeat against the quiet. Suburban streets, the gleaming black body of the car sparkled under the sun, polished to perfection. Every curve reflected light like liquid glass, and the chrome trim caught every glint like a flash of silver lightning. I wasn't trying to show off. I'd worked for years to earn this. To me, this car wasn't just metal and leather. It was a symbol of discipline, of sacrifices, of decades of late nights and early mornings. It was the reward I allowed myself for never backing down in the line of duty. As I slowly eased into the driveway, I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing against me. Curtains twitched in houses up and down the street, porch blinds shifted just slightly, giving away the curious faces peeking from behind them. The neighborhood was picture perfect, lined with neat lawns, identical mailboxes, and flower beds, so carefully arranged, they looked like they'd been planned by a committee. This wasn't just any neighborhood, it was an HOA neighborhood, which meant rules, power plays, and always someone watching. For most people, it was just a car. A beautiful car, sure, but nothing that should cause a stir. But I could tell by the whispers, the frozen stares, and the silent judgment that my arrival had already stirred the pot. New neighbors are always a curiosity, but a new neighbor pulling up in a luxury Rolls Royce that was gossip material for weeks. And then I saw her dot from across the street. She marched like a storm brewing in human form. Her arms swung with sharp precision, her chin tilted upward with an air of superiority. Even from a distance, I could see the fiery determination in her eyes. She wasn't just curious, she was offended. She was outraged. She was ready for war. Her name was Karen. At least that's what the neighbors called her behind her back. And within seconds of seeing her in action, I knew why. She was the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the kind of person who believed her clipboard and loud voice gave her more power than the law itself. Karen wasn't dressed for gardening, or for errands, or even for a casual walk. No, she was dressed for confrontation. Her bright pink visor was pulled low over her forehead, her polo shirt tucked tightly into pressed khaki shorts. Around her neck dangled a lanyard with some laminated card that said HOA board member, as if it were a badge of authority. She clutched a thick binder to her chest, no doubt filled with rules, regulations, and complaints she had personally filed. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. Her lips were pursed so tightly, it was a wonder she could still breathe. Her brows knitted together, forming a deep crease that seemed permanent, and her eyes sharp, unblinking, fueled with the confidence of someone who had never once considered that they might be wrong. Trouble was brewing. I leaned casually against my car door, watching her approach. I had seen faces like hers before. On the job, they belonged to people who thought yelling could cover up their mistakes. In neighborhoods, they belonged to the Karens of the world, people who confused bossiness with leadership. She strutted right up to the edge of my driveway, her shadow falling over the hood of my Rolls. "You can't park that here," she snapped before I even had a chance to say a word. Her tone wasn't curious, it wasn't polite, it was accusatory, like she had already decided I was guilty of something. I smiled faintly. "Good morning to you too. This is actually my driveway." Karen squinted at me, then at the car, then back at me again, as though I had just told her the most unbelievable lie she had ever heard. "Your driveway? I don't think so. I know every homeowner on this street, and I've never seen you before. That car doesn't belong here. People like you don't belong here." There it was. That smug tone, laced with entitlement, and just a hint of venom. I had been in the neighborhood less than 10 minutes, and already, the queen of the HOA had decided I was her enemy. Neighbors had started to gather now. A man across the street pretended to water his lawn while blatantly eavesdropping. A woman with a stroller slowed her pace, turning her head just enough to catch every word. Kids on bikes circled closer, sensing drama. The street had transformed into a stage, and Karen had appointed herself the lead actor for me. I wasn't rattled. I'd been in situations 10 times more tense than this. Situations where a wrong word could escalate into chaos. This was just theater. But Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. To her, I was just a stranger in a flashy car who didn't fit her idea of the neighborhood. What she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the new police chief in town. And if she thought she could intimidate me into backing down, she was about to learn a very humbling lesson. Karen stormed across the street like a general marching into battle. Her steps were sharp and deliberate, her sneakers slapping against the pavement with every ounce of authority she thought she possessed. Hands planted firmly on her hips, chin tilted upward like she was looking down on me from a throne, she radiated the kind of energy only someone used to being the loudest in the room could have. To her, this wasn't just a casual walk over to say hello to the new neighbor. This was a mission to put me in my place before I had even unpacked a single box. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice slicing through the peaceful morning air. Birds scattered from a nearby tree at the sudden volume. That car does not belong here. She jabbed her finger toward my Rolls Royce like it was a weapon, as though the car itself had committed a crime against her perfectly manicured neighborhood. Her voice carried across the cul-de-sac, bouncing off the quiet homes like a siren. A couple of blinds shifted nearby. Neighbors were watching. Kieran knew it too, and she thrived on it. This wasn't just about me. This was her stage, and the HOA audience was settling in for the show. I leaned casually against the hood, raising an eyebrow, more amused than irritated. I'd dealt with angry people before, people who wanted control, who needed to feel powerful. Compared to that, this was child's play. Actually, it does, I said smoothly, my tone calm, unshaken. It's mine. Karen's eyes narrowed into slits. She let out a short, sharp laugh that didn't sound like amusement at all. It sounded like disbelief wrapped in condescension. Yours? She scoffed, emphasizing the word as if it were the punchline of a bad joke. I don't think so. I know everyone in this neighborhood, and I've never seen you before. She folded her arms, binder pressed against her chest. Like a shield of righteousness, you must be trespassing or worse, casing the place. The way she spat out those words made it sound like she was auditioning for a detective role in a crime drama. But this wasn't TV, and I wasn't the criminal she was pretending I was. Still, her voice kept climbing higher, louder, each sentence crafted to draw in more ears from nearby houses. And it was working. One by one, the neighbors began making themselves visible. A man across the street, still in his pajamas, pretended to pick up a newspaper he didn't actually read, his eyes never leaving us. A woman in yoga pants paused her jog right at the corner, bending to retie her shoe but clearly eavesdropping. Two kids on bicycles slowed their circles, drifting closer as though they had front row seats to the latest neighborhood drama. Karen's face flushed with the thrill of the spotlight. She straightened her visor, squared her shoulders, and leaned in as if to challenge me further. We don't allow that kind of flaunting here, she said, her eyes darting to the Rolls Royce like it was dripping poison onto the asphalt. This is a respectable neighborhood. People work hard to keep it that way. You can't just roll in here with pithis. Her words came out like accusations, but underneath, there was something else in V, maybe even insecurity. My car was a mirror, reflecting her deepest frustrations back at her. And instead of admitting that, she did what people like Karen always do. She attacked. I kept my voice steady, deliberately calm, because nothing infuriates a person like her more than refusing to rise to their bait. With respect, I said, I live here now. This car is parked in my driveway. I don't see a problem. That only made her bristle more. Her face turned a shade redder, her fists tightening at her sides. She stomped once on the pavement, as though trying to physically stamp out my words. Oh, there's a problem, she hissed. You think you can just sneak into a community like this? Not on my watch. I'm on the HOA board, and I'll have you reported. Trust me, you won't last a week here. Her threats rang out like a declaration of war. The neighbors gasped quietly, their whispers drifting on the breeze. Some seemed entertained, others uncomfortable, but none of them stepped in. This was Karen's show, and they were too used to her antics to interfere. I studied her for a moment, my calm demeanor making her shift uncomfortably, as if she was expecting me to get angry, to fight back, to give her the explosion she craved. But I wasn't giving her that. I had dealt with real emergencies, real crisis. This was just noise. Karen, I said finally, my voice level but firm, you might want to step back. You're making a scene. That was the trigger. Her eyes widened, nostrils flaring, as though I had just thrown gasoline on her fire. Making a scene was exactly what she wanted, but being called out on it, that was unacceptable. I'm calling the police. She shrieked suddenly, pulling her phone from her pocket like a weapon. Right now. You think you can outsmart me? You think you can bring that thing into my neighborhood? I'll make sure you're out of here before the day is over. When her voice cracked with fury, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the screen. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. Phones were out now, some of them recording. The spectacle had reached peak drama. And me. I just smiled faintly, watching her unravel. Calm as ever. Karen thought she was about to call in the cavalry. What she didn't know was that she had already lost the battle the moment she opened her mouth without warning. Karen whipped out her phone like a gunslinger, drawing in an old western. Her visor nearly slipped off her head with the speed of her movement, but she caught it with her other hand before it could betray her dramatic moment. I'm calling the police, she declared, her voice booming with the confidence of someone who thought they were saving the neighborhood from impending doom. The entire street seemed to freeze, as if the very air wanted to lean in closer and hear what would have to happen next. The dramatic pause before she pressed the numbers was almost comical. She stared at me, locking eyes as if daring me to run, her thumb hovering above the screen like she was about to launch a missile strike. The neighbors held their breath. One of the kids on the bikes whispered, "She's really doing it," to his friend, and the two of them giggled nervously. To them, this was better than any Saturday morning cartoon. Finally, with exaggerated flair, she jabbed the screen and lifted the phone to her ear. "Yes, hello," she said loudly, projecting her voice as though the 911 dispatcher couldn't hear her unless the entire cul-de-sac did. "There's a suspicious man with a Rolls Royce in our neighborhood." She drew out the word suspicious with relish, like she was savoring the taste of her own authority. She wasn't talking to the dispatcher anymore. She was performing for her audience. Her voice pitched higher, louder, every word carefully chosen for maximum dramatic effect. "Yes, he's just standing there. No, I don't recognize him. I think he's up to no good. Probably casing the houses. Please send someone quick, before it's too late." She clutched her laminated HOA badge with her free hand as though it made her official, like she was deputized by the neighborhood itself. I leaned back against the hood of my car, crossing my arms, and simply watched. Her voice was so loud that I could hear both sides of the conversation, the dispatcher trying to remain calm and professional, and Karen escalating into what sounded like a neighborhood crime thriller. She wasn't reporting me. She was auditioning for an award. A jogger who had stopped to tie her shoes now pulled out her phone too, angling it discreetly as she began recording. The kids on their bikes edged closer, their eyes wide with excitement. Across the street, the man in his pajamas had abandoned his fake newspaper act entirely. He was just standing there with his arms folded, staring like he was front row at the circus. Karen's performance grew wilder. "Yes, he's leaning on the car right now. Yes, the car is black, a Rolls Royce. I don't know if it's stolen, but it's too fancy for this neighborhood. People like him don't drive cars like that unless it's suspicious." That last word echoed in the air, dripping with judgment. Some neighbors exchanged looks, a few shaking their heads in disbelief, but no one said a word. Everyone knew Karen. Everyone knew she loved the spotlight. And now, she had an audience, a stage in what she thought was her starring moment. I kept my expression neutral, almost bored, but inside, I couldn't help but laugh. I had seen people tie themselves into knots with their own words before, but watching Karen dig this deep a hole was something else entirely. Every sentence she added, every accusation she threw out, every detail she embellished it, all made her look more unhinged and less credible. But she didn't see that. Not yet. "Oh, thank you," she said finally, her tone softening dramatically. "Please hurry, we don't feel safe with him here." She hung up the phone with a flourish, like an actor delivering their final line before the curtain fell. She turned back to me, her face lit with a smug, victorious smile. "There," she said, dusting her hands off as though she had just completed some noble task. "The police are on their way. You can explain yourself to them." Her eyes gleamed with triumph, as if she truly believed I was about to be hauled away in handcuffs. The neighbors buzzed quietly, murmurs spreading through the crowd. Some were clearly entertained, others looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from one foot to the other. A few whispered to each other, perhaps questioning whether Karen had finally gone too far. The kids on their bikes couldn't contain themselves anymore. "Miss Karen?" one of them asked with genuine innocence. "What if he really does live here?" Karen spun toward them, aghast, as though the very suggestion was blasphemy. "Impossible," she barked. "I know this neighborhood better than anyone. If he lived here, I'd know. I always know." Her words hung in the air, heavy with arrogance, and that's when I realized something. She wasn't just obsessed with control, she was addicted to being right. The idea that she could be wrong was unthinkable to her. That was why she doubled down, why she shouted louder, why she escalated so quickly. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about crime. It was about her ego. And now, with one phone call, she had set herself up for the most humiliating reality check of her life. I shifted slightly, adjusting my stance, and met her smug grin with a calm, measured smile. "All right," I said simply, my tone polite but laced with amusement. "We'll wait." Karen frowned at the ease in my voice, like she had expected me to panic or bolt. Instead, I leaned casually against my Rolls Royce, as relaxed as if I were waiting for a coffee order. My lack of reaction unsettled her. She glanced around at the neighbors, seeking validation, but their faces told her what she didn't want to admit: this wasn't playing out the way she thought it would. Stage was set. The crowd was gathered. The cops were on their way. Karen thought she was about to have her big victory. What she didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that her entire performance was about to collapse in spectacular fashion, and I was more than happy to let her write her own downfall. Minutes later, the low hum of an engine grew louder, and then the familiar flash of red and blue lights reflected off every window in the cul-de-sac. A squad car turned the corner and rolled slowly into the street, its siren mercifully silent, though the lights alone were enough to make the neighbors buzz with excitement. For a moment, the entire block felt like the set of a TV drama. Kids abandoned their bikes, parents pulled their children closer, phones went up, half the neighborhood was now recording. Karen sprang into action, as if she were the star witness in a crime investigation. She flailed her arms wildly, waving both hands in the air, her laminated HOA badge bouncing against her chest like she was flashing credentials. "Over here, officers, over here," she shouted, her voice breaking with urgency. She jabbed her finger toward me like she had just uncovered a most wanted fugitive. "That's him. That's the guy I told you about." The squad car rolled to a stop right in front of my driveway. The driver's door opened slowly, and out stepped two uniformed officers. The first was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm, steady presence. the kind of cop whose very stance communicated control. The second was younger, energetic, and clearly trying not to smirk as he surveyed the scene. Their eyes immediately landed on me, but instead of suspicion or tension, I saw recognition flash across their faces. "Chief," the older officer said, his tone laced with surprise. His brows rose, and then the corners of his mouth tugged into a smile. The younger officer let out a chuckle he couldn't quite contain. "Didn't expect to see you here today, sir." The effect was immediate. Karen froze mid-gesture, her hand still pointing toward me like a broken compass. Her face, drained of color, the smug confidence that had fueled her entire performance evaporating in an instant. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out, just a series of stammers that barely formed syllables. "CH, chief," she finally croaked, the word trembling as though it carried the weight of her worst nightmare. I let the silence stretch for a beat, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment. Then I reached calmly into my jacket pocket, pulled out my leather wallet, and flipped it open. The gold badge caught the sunlight, gleaming for the entire neighborhood to see. I held it up just long enough for Karen to absorb every ounce of reality crashing down on her. "That's right," I said evenly, my voice carrying enough authority to silence the whispers around us. "I'm the new police chief in town." I paused deliberately, letting the neighbors lean in with anticipation. "And this neighborhood," I gestured lightly around us, then pointed to the house behind me. "I live here now." The reaction was electric. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by an almost collective laugh of disbelief. Some neighbors covered their mouths, trying to stifle their amusement. Others shook their heads with wide grins, as though they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The pajama-clad man across the street finally let out a full belly laugh, doubling over and slapping his knee. Even the kids on their bikes howled with laughter, their voices echoing down the street. Karen, however, was frozen in place. Her arms hung limply at her sides, the binder she'd been clutching slipping slightly from her grasp. Her lips trembled, and her eyes darted wildly between me, the officers, and the sea of entertained neighbors. The smug mask she wore so proudly was gone, ripped away by the harsh light of reality. The younger officer tried and failed to hide his grin. "Ma'am," he said politely, though his tone carried a teasing edge, "I think you might have jumped the gun on this one." Karen blinked rapidly, her face reddening by the second. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, caught between wanting to defend herself and realizing there was no defense left. The neighbors weren't just witnesses, they were her jury, and by the looks on their faces, the verdict was already in. The older officer stepped forward, his tone respectful as he addressed me. "Sir, if there's been any misunderstanding, we'll clear it up right now." "No misunderstanding," I said, sliding my badge back into my pocket. I kept my voice light but firm, letting the crowd hear every word. "Just a neighbor here, who thought she knew more than she did." The chuckles from the audience grew louder. Someone muttered, "Classic Karen," and several others snickered in agreement. Karen's jaw tightened, but she didn't dare respond. Her power had evaporated with the blink of an eye, and for the first time, she looked small, smaller than I think she had ever felt in her life. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us, though my expression remained calm, even friendly. "Karen," I said softly enough that only those nearby could hear, "next time you want to protect the neighborhood, try introducing yourself first. Might save you a little embarrassment." Her eyes flickered with something, anger, shame, maybe both, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. The crowd's quiet laughter and the officers' amused expressions had trapped her in a cage of her own making. As the officers exchanged knowing glances and the neighbors whispered with delight, I returned to lean casually against my roll. "Well," I said with a smile that carried just the right amount of finality, "welcome to the neighborhood." And with that, the entire block seemed to exhale at once. The show was over, and the queen of the HOA had just been dethroned in front of her loyal subjects. Karen's bravado crumbled in an instant. The woman who had marched across the street like a warrior queen now looked like a balloon slowly deflating. Her shoulders slumped, her arms trembled, and her hands shook as she tried desperately to backpedal out of the situation she had created. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice weak and uneven, a far cry from the booming commands she had barked just minutes before. "I was just trying to protect the community." Her cheeks blazed red, the kind of red that wasn't just embarrassment, it was humiliation. Shame and panic all rolled into one, but the damage was already done. There was no rewinding the performance she had just put on for the entire neighborhood. Every eye in the cul-de-sac was on her, every ear had heard her shrill accusations, every phone had captured her wild theatrics, and now, those same neighbors were whispering amongst themselves, shaking their heads, their smirks impossible to hide. I could hear snippets of conversation drifting through the crowd. Protect the community. From who? The police chief. She really thought she could get him arrested. Karen's never going to live this down. The officers didn't help her case either. One of them, the younger one who had been grinning since the moment he stepped out of the car, tilted his head and smirked openly. "Maybe next time," he said, his voice carrying just enough sarcasm to sting. "Check the facts before calling 911. His words were gentle enough to sound like advice, but everyone knew it was a job, a well-deserved one. A few neighbors laughed out loud, the sound carrying through the block like victory bells. Karen's mouth opened as if she wanted to argue, to salvage a shred of dignity, but no words came out. She clutched her binder tighter against her chest, her eyes darting around as though searching for an escape route, but there was none. The street that had once been her kingdom, the people she believed she ruled over, were no longer on her side. They weren't loyal subjects anymore. They were witnesses to her downfall. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The situation spoke for itself. Instead, I gave her the same polite smile I'd give any nervous citizen. Professional, controlled. Welcome to the neighborhood, Karen, I said, my tone steady and polite, but with just enough weight to remind her of what had just happened. Let's hope this was our first and last incident. Her face twisted for a moment. Was it anger? Was it shame? Maybe both? But she nodded quickly, bobbing her head like a puppet, eager to escape the moment. Why yes. Of course, she mumbled. I slid gracefully back into my Rolls Royce, the door closing with a satisfying, solid thud. The leather seats welcomed me like an old friend, and for a second, I just sat there, listening to the hum of murmurs and muffled laughter rising behind me. As I started the engine, the deep purr filled the silence, a sound that seemed to echo, with finality, through the windshield. I caught a last glimpse of Karen, standing small and defeated in the middle of the street. Her binder clutched so tightly it looked like she was holding onto it for balance. Her visor was tilted awkwardly now, her once pristine uniform of power looking more like a costume she no longer had the courage to wear. She wasn't the queen of the block anymore, she was the punchline of it. As I eased the car down the driveway and onto the street, the neighborhood came alive with soft chuckles, whispered jokes, and even a few loud laughs that Karen couldn't possibly ignore. Some neighbors waved politely at me as I passed, their smiles wide, their eyes grateful not just for the show, but for the fact that someone had finally stood up to the self-proclaimed HOA tyrant. One man muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Well, there goes Karen's reign." His wife elbowed him, but she was smiling too. The kids on their bikes pedaled in circles, chanting, "Karen called the cops on the chief. Karen called the cops on the chief." Their laughter filled the air like fireworks. Karen tried to shush them, but the more she waved her hands and hissed at them to be quiet, the louder they got. It was like pouring gasoline on a fire. The harder she tried to control the narrative, the more obvious it became that she had lost it completely. Turned the corner and drove off. The sound of laughter and murmurs followed me like a trail. I didn't need to look back to know what was happening. Karen standing there, her face burning, her reputation crumbling before her eyes, while the entire block replayed the scene over and over in their heads. And that was the real ending to the story, not the phone call, not the flashing lights, not even the reveal of my badge. The real ending was the shift in the air, the subtle but undeniable change in how the neighborhood saw her. Karen had been put in her place, and from this day forward, she would never hold the same power she once believed she had. Because in a community like this, stories spread faster than any HOA memo ever could. And this story, the story of Karen calling 911 on the new police chief's Rolls Royce, wasn't going away anytime soon. She'd hear it whispered at barbecues, see it in the smirks at the mailbox, feel it in the chuckles when she walked into HOA meetings. She had wanted to protect the community. Instead, she had humiliated herself in front of it, and she'd never, ever live it down.